Hey, good evening, Bio 202 class. Good to see you again. Sorry that I didn't do this last week. Like I said, I underestimated how busy I was going to be. And I'll just say that I am still tired from last week, and all I want to do is sleep right now. So I'll go ahead and get this going. Shouldn't take more than 10 to 15 minutes. So this is what I was going to cover last week, basically going from food to waste. Very similar to how I did the immune system one, where I pretended I was infected with something and told you how my body was going to react. And I kind of eat something and kind of discuss the process of how it's going to go from my mouth and out of the body. Okay, so digestion starts well before you actually eat the food. You actually have to think about food first to start the process of digestion. So it's all in your head, part of the cephalic phase of gastric activity. So the vagus nerve is going to start sending signals down to your stomach, down to your mouth, and kind of start getting your body ready to receive food. So you're going to start salivating. You'll start thinking about food a lot. You might hear the grumbling in the stomach. That's actually muscle contractions. Um, and when you have food in your stomach, you don't hear the muscle contractions. But when you're really hungry or your stomach's empty, you hear those muscle contractions a lot more vibrate through your body. And then another thing that does happen is that gastrin secretion actually starts when you start thinking about food. We didn't really cover it too much in the notes, but just know that that chemical or that enzyme, it's a chemical enzyme, that's going to get started. That's going to start secreting when you start eating food. And I'll talk about why that's important later. So for this one, now that I've actually thought about food, you know what? I'm really hungry. I'm going to grab something. So I'm going to grab a cookie. I love Oreos. These are the thins. Got to watch the weight. But I'll start with this cookie. So it's going to enter into my mouth or the oral cavity. So as I'm chewing this is the process called mastication. I am trying to break this cookie into smaller chunks. So it's going to be easier for me to digest. And I just swallowed it because I don't like to chew that long. If I was still chewing it, my saliva is going to start being secreted. It's going to kind of moisten it up, make it easier for me to break down. The tongue kind of keeps everything moving around. So if I got a section that has more cookie than others, I can kind of get more going to an unused area of my mouth. So I'm constantly trying to break this cookie apart. Now, because this is a cookie, a sugar slash carb slash starch, my saliva contains salivary amylase, and I'm actually going to start breaking down cookie or sugar in my mouth. And theoretically, if I just left the cookie in my mouth, it would digest fully in my mouth if I just let it sit there. But in realistic terms, about 3 to 5% of your carbs are digested in the mouth before you swallow it, and then it gets completed in the stomach. I know the notes covered, I believe it was lipids or proteins, but that's really specific to children, to babies specifically. And there's some research that says that it might actually, that some of the other things like proteins and lipids do start digestion in the mouth. But for the most part, what's been widely accepted right now is that only really carbs or sugars. Everything else starts digestion in the stomach slash small intestines. So again, I'm going to eat this cookie, put this food in my mouth, start going through these processes of mastication, use my tongue to move it around, trying getting that saliva in there to kind of soften it up for me so it goes down easy. One thing to note is that this cookie is no longer food now. It is now a bolus. I've made it into a small ball. Makes it easier for me to swallow them. So now my cookie or my bolus is on the path to the stomach. This is done by a process called peristalsis. So what's really happening is the smooth muscle in my esophagus is really starting to kind of slowly contract and push the cookie or the bolus down. What kind of happens is if the bowl, let's say the bolus is right here, so the cookie's right here, the top part of my esophagus will kind of contract while the bottom part opens up and it like slowly pushes it down. And then as that happens, that top part will then contract and then the bottom part will open up and slowly move down. Just pretend this is happening all in one motion. So as I'm compressing at the top, I push my bolus down, or the opening on the bottom opens up so the bolus can move, and then the top part then contracts again, pushes it down, contracts, pushes it down. This happens over, I think, 30 seconds, maybe to a minute. It doesn't stay long in your esophagus. One thing to remember is that the epiglottis, which helps cover up your respiratory part of this pharyngeal lining or whatever, your tube, the epiglottis will actually go down, and that prevents the bolus from actually going into your lungs. That's part of the process where people start choking and stuff like that, is that cookie actually gets stuck in the blue opening you see right below the epiglottis. And so as long as your epiglottis is working properly, it'll kind of come down, it'll let the bolus pass, and then it'll open back up again so you can still perform your respiration, breathing in, breathing out, that kind of stuff. And then serotonin is the chemical that actually stimulates peristalsis. As your food is coming down, the stomach kind of sends a feedback back to the brain to say, hey, let's get this food moving because I want it for myself. Okay, so now that you're in the stomach, this bolus is going to be exposed to mechanical movements. Remember, the stomach has 3 layers of muscle. It can kind of have, it has like a, let's call it a vertical, a horizontal, and this like diagonal motion. So the stomach can actually kind of twist and turn, which is very unique as a muscle group. And those crazy motions allow the bolus to be broken up much sooner than that. At the same time, you're going to have chemical secretions. I listed 2 that I believe are very important, but obviously they're all fairly important. Gastrin. So remember when I mentioned gastrin at the very beginning? As you think about food, your stomach starts releasing gastrin. Gastrin stimulates the hydrochloric acid to be released from the parietal cells. And then the chief cells, they release pepsinogen, which is a precursor or like an inactive enzyme. But with the presence of hydrochloric acid, now you have pepsin, and then pepsin is used to start your protein digestion. So the gastrin is released to kind of start telling your stomach, hey, let's start getting hydrochloric acid out here. But as soon as that cookie or that bolus, I'll just say bolus from now on, hits the stomach, you're now in your gastric phase, and it's the food entering, or the bolus entering the stomach starts the gastric phase. At that point, that's when the stomach says, okay, now the food's here, start secreting everything, start churning everything around. And that's where the prep of the stomach helps, because now it just has to have the chief cell secrete pepsinogen, and it can start making pepsin, and you can start digesting proteins. The bolus will stay in the stomach for about 2 to 4 hours. And along that time, that bolus is being broken down into much smaller pieces, which will make it easier for absorption to occur in the intestines. Okay, so now we're going through the pyloric sphincter. Like I said, the bolus has now been digested enough to be turned into smaller pieces, or what we refer to as chyme. And so you can see that my 1 bolus cookie now became 3 individual bolus cookies. This starts the intestinal phase of gastric activity. So remember back when we talked about the immune system, how the stomach is very acidic as a way to kill microbes that may not like acids, but those that do like acids then get passed on to the small intestine, which has a much higher pH, and then it'll kill those types of microbes. So we know the small intestine is much higher pH than the stomach, but you don't want that stomach acid to be going into your small intestine. So as soon as food starts, or chyme starts entering the duodenum, you start having duodenal secretions. So one of them, the first one is CCK. So this one triggers the liver to start releasing bile. If you remember bile, we talked about bile as a mechanical agitator like soap. It starts kind of mixing in with our fatty acids, or sorry, our fats and our chyme to just help it mechanically break down a little easier. So the liver makes the gallbladder, or sorry, the liver makes the bile, which gets stored in the gallbladder. And so CCK will have the liver make more bile. It also tells the gallbladder to release the bile it's been storing. And then it prepares the pancreas. There's another sphincter in the pancreas. It basically opens that sphincter up so that the pancreas can start releasing its enzymes to help with digestion and some of the absorption. Secretin. So secretin is secreted as a way to neutralize the very low pH or the acidity of the stomach. And then GIP stimulates insulin secretion. So the body, it kind of works, in tandem. It does a lot of different things at the same time. So as this new chyme, which is mostly cookie. This is a cookie, so it's probably mostly starch. I doubt there's anything else in here, maybe some lipids, but it's probably mostly starch or sugar. As that enters the small intestine, the GIP that's secreted kind of tells the rest of the body, hey, let's start releasing insulin so that when the blood sugar, or the sugar that I am absorbing goes back into the bloodstream, we already know that we're going to have a spike in blood sugar. We can start storing that extra sugar in the cells. So the body's just preparing as a way to control its blood sugar. This is a normal process. And that way, as you start absorbing the starches or the sugars and they get into the bloodstream, they already know I'm going to get stored in the cells, or I'm going to use somewhere else. And it controls your blood sugar in a very good way. Okay, so now in the small intestine, this is also where absorption occurs, primarily in the jejunum. So the duodenum will finish the digestive portion using both mechanical digestion, but primarily chemical digestion with the enzymes. The jejunum will then start absorbing everything, all the lipids, all the starches, all the proteins. Remember, we did talk about lipids and how they're actually absorbed by a different system in the cardiovascular exam time that we did. I'll let you look that up if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And then the ileum actually does B12 absorption. So recall for intrinsic factor, that's released in the stomach as well. Intrinsic factor just helps the ileum absorb the B12. Like without intrinsic factor, you can't absorb B12. So the intrinsic factor is there as a way to promote the B12 to be absorbed in the ileum. Again, this is all happening in the small intestine. The enzymes that we care about that are being secreted by the pancreas are pancreatic amylase. So remember, I talked about salivary amylase that's occurring in the saliva. If you just remember amylase, that's really all you need to know, but just know that they're secreted in two different places. Pancreatic amylase coming from the pancreas will then finish the digestion of your carbs, your starches, sugars, again, all the same thing. Lipase primarily is used to break down fats or lipids. And then proteins are actually broken down by a couple different enzymes, trypsin, chymotrypsin, and peptidases. And again, we didn't talk about nucleic acids. I won't go into that, but I think it's nuclease is the enzyme that breaks down the nucleides or the nucleic acids. But we're not going to talk about that for the most part for the exam. But just know these are the main enzymes that are secreted by the pancreas to break down the lipids, the sugars, and the proteins. In the small intestine, we go back to peristalsis. So again, there's a nice smooth lining that's going to start slowly moving everything around. But another thing that happens in the small intestine is segmentation. So kind of showed here, I talked about how broccoli is my superfood. I still have some broccoli in my small intestine, probably from yesterday. So what segmentation does is it'll take that chyme of my cookie and the chyme of my broccoli, and it'll start breaking it apart into much smaller pieces, and it kind of mixes it together. As it does this, the whole idea is just to keep breaking down the chyme into smaller and smaller pieces to help absorption as it goes through the entire small intestine. Just so that segmentation, again, it's a process. We break things down into smaller pieces, or we segment them. And it's not always like, if I ate broccoli yesterday, the first thing I'm going to poop out tomorrow is broccoli. No, it's going to be a mixture of what I'm eating today versus what I ate yesterday versus what I ate maybe 2 or 3 days ago, depending on, how often you go to the bathroom. Okay, now through here, you go through the ileocecal valve. So at this point, all the absorption that your body needs in terms of the food, so the starches, the fats, the lipids, that's mostly done. Once you get into the large intestine, that's where you start absorbing like water, your electrolytes, like your salts, your chlorides, that kind of stuff, and biosalts, and also vitamin K is produced by bacteria in the appendix, but no other absorption of molecules like the macromolecules is occurring anymore. And so now the chyme becomes feces. So now the feces are, say, in this large intestine. I believe they take up to 40-ish hours to get through the entire process. As these feces move out, they'll move in what's called large or mass movements. And so these mass movements occur 1 to 3 times a day. And basically, as you eat stuff and you digest things and you absorb things in the small intestine, it triggers the large intestine to say, oh, I've got food coming in the back. I should probably start moving this stuff along. Again, naturally occurs 1 or 3 times a day. That's kind of where the thought process of, you should probably use the bathroom 1 or 3 times a day is that ideally your large intestine's mostly full. So as it does a mass movement, let's say it pushes something from the cecum into the ascending from the colon. Cecum into the ascending colon, and something from the ascending colon gets pushed into the transverse colon, and something from the transverse colon goes down to the descending colon, and then something from the descending colon goes to the sigmoid colon, and something from the sigmoid colon should be pushing onto the rectum, and from anything that was in the rectum should start trying to force its way out the anus. Now, we call this process defecation. You have 2 main sphincters that control it. You have your internal sphincter, which is involuntary. So that one opens and closes as it needs to. And then the external sphincter is the one that we are raised and taught to have control. So we can kind of hold it back a little bit or, defecate whenever we feel we have an opening, we can go take a bathroom break, whatever. But for the most part, these 2 sphincters will control the defecation process. Just know if you do try to hold it in, eventually, the internal sphincter is going to open, and that's usually your little warning, like, okay, I need to go use the bathroom real quick because I don't know how long I can hold it. So the internal sphincter is going to do what it can, but it's not. You can't control it. You can only hold it back with your external sphincter. And again, that's all controls that we have learned at a very young age. And then from there, the waste is removed from the body, goes through our sewage system, gets broken down, gets cleaned, processed. Any water that's left over, we then go and clean up and put it back in our system. But for the most part, that's really it. So, that's where my cookie is going to be in the next 3 or 4 days. And we kind of, talk through the process, if you will. So in summary, we did cover the 3 phases of gastric activity. So cephalic, the thinking of the food. The gastric is when the food actually hits the stomach. And intestinal is when the bolus, then chyme, passes into the intestines. We did cover mechanical and chemical digestion, including mastication, the different enzymes that are involved, movements in the digestive tract, so like how everything moves, like peristalsis, segmentation, mass movements, and then just the process of going from food to feces. So happy eating. If you have any questions, reach out, and I'll see you all in lecture.